tipsforbadpainters.com. Hello, Mark here at tipsforbadpainters.com, and today we're here in the kitchen to talk about everybody's favorite subject, wet pallets. Wow, I didn't realize how many people could actually fit in this kitchen, but thank you very much. Oh, is there a question? What? Oh, the title didn't say wet pallet, it said beer and Nascar. Well, did you honestly think that somebody would actually click on a video entitled Wet Pallets? Anybody that's been painting for a while understands that you have to have good paint consistency in order to paint miniatures. And usually what happens is after you've been painting for a little while, the paint on your palette ends up getting dry and clumpy, and that is really bad for painting miniatures. So the best thing that you can do to solve this problem is use a wet palette. And quite a few people have tried wet palettes and probably abandoned them because they were a pain in the neck. So today we're going to make sure that you have a way to make a wet palette that's actually going to work. So a wet palette is really only necessary if you're going to be painting for a long time. If you're only going to paint for a couple of minutes, it's not worth the effort of putting one together. But honestly, this whole business of, I can paint for a few minutes and then put it down. I can stop anytime I want. Yeah, really, you're an addict. Just admit it. Once you pick up a brush, it's going to be at least 3 or 4 hours before you can put it down. Come on, just admit it. One mistake people make when they first start working with wet palettes is to try to use wax paper on their wet palette. Wax paper will do absolutely nothing at all. If you can use wax paper, don't even bother making one, because the moisture will not interact with the paint that's on top of it. It's a total waste. You have to use parchment paper. I think there might be a paper that is made specifically for wet palettes in the art stores, but parchment paper that you get at the grocery store is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The first thing I did when I first started making wet palettes was to use a fairly common technique of just a regular sponge and putting the parchment paper on top of that. But here, let me show you what happens after just a few minutes of using this technique. There, see how the paper just curls up on the sponge? It makes it really hard when you're trying to get into the paint, and the paper's all curled up, and then all this on the edges is going to be totally dry. Really it really doesn't work very well. The problem with this kind of wet palette is that we're missing one extremely important step, and that is that the parchment paper has to be primed. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to prime the parchment paper and at the same time create a workspace that is really easy to paint with. Okay, to make this wet palette, you're going to need 3 things. You're going to need parchment paper cut into a fairly small square. You're going to need a paper towel that's probably a couple of paper towels, folded up into a square that's a little bit bigger than your parchment paper that you just cut, and a cutting board. I found this one at the dollar store and just cut the handle off of it, but any plastic, square piece of plastic will work. Okay, this is real simple. All you have to do is put your parchment paper on top of the cutting board, and then put your paper towel that's folded up. It's about 4 or 5 layers thick. That's folded up, and put it directly on top of the parchment paper. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run over to the sink and I'm going to soak the entire thing under water. It only takes a second. Okay, now that you have your paper towel and your parchment paper completely soaked on your cutting board, now is the most important step. The parchment paper has to be really, really hot. And the way you do this is I'm going to turn around and I'm going to put this in the microwave for about 20 seconds. And that's going to get this paper, really good and steaming hot. And fortunately, 20 seconds is almost about the exact amount of time you need to eat a devil dog. Generally, they tell actors not to eat on TV, but, I don't have a problem with it. Oh, shoot. I'll have to finish this later. Sorry. Okay. Our paper towel and our parchment paper is really hot right now. It's just about getting ready to steam. I'm going to leave it here for a second because if you try to work with it immediately, you might burn your hands a little bit. Okay, so after you've let this sit for a few seconds and finish your devil dog, what you're going to do is you're going to take the parchment paper and the paper towel together. You're going to hold them together and you're going to flip it upside down. Okay, see how nice and flat that the parchment paper is laying on that paper towel now? It's not curling up at all. Okay, thanks for joining us on our tutorial on beer and Nascar, and keep checking back with us, and eventually we'll have some more videos up with some more amazing painting techniques. Bye.
tipsforbadpainters.com